In JavaScript, when you're working with information that might take a little time to arrive, you're going to find yourself working with a kind of object called a promise. A promise is a representation of a value that may return now, in the future, or never. And a promise has three states: pending, fulfilled, and rejected. And typically, you work with promises a lot when you are working with an API, for example, that you need to grab information from, or you're trying to access data from a remote server. So that is the scenario that we're going to work with today to understand how to asynchronously fetch data from a separate remote source, because that's something that we do a lot of when we work in modern JavaScript projects. So GitHub has an open API that allows you to access public information about its users, and it's called api.github.com/users. And we want to use the fetch web API in order to grab this information. Now, if I was to open up the URL and then append my username to it at the end, you can see the kind of information that we want to get. It's a JSON object with all this public information about me. So let's go back and take a look at how we would fetch it inside our JavaScript application. So first, let's see what happens if we just try to use the fetch API. I'm just going to open up a console log, and in there, I'm going to fetch that URL with my username appended at the end. And when I do that, you can see that there is a promise and it's pending. Now, if I open that up, you'll notice that it's actually saying the state of the promise is fulfilled. Because again, remember, things are happening really quickly. When you first saw the console log show up, it was pending, but then at some point we got the information. So when we open up something like this in a console log, it actually is evaluating it again and showing you what the current state looks like. And in this case, it's fulfilled. And if I was to open up that promise result, you can see that we're supposed to get a response object, and it's going to have a bunch of information in here. But instead of getting that pending promise, we want to get that fulfilled promise result. So in order to do that, anytime you see that there's a promise, you can immediately jump to the async/await paradigm. Promises and this kind of asynchronous fetching is a big part of how you work with JavaScript. So if there's one thing that I would recommend that you dive deeper into after going through this series, it is that. But going deeper into it is not the scope of this video. We are just going to look at how to use the async and await and learn a little bit about it so that we can get quickly up and running. Now that I know that it's a promise, what I'm going to do is I'm going to start up an asynchronous function. How do you do that? You do it by putting the word async in front of the function, like so. And we're going to call this get GitHub user data. Now that I have this function and it's labeled as an asynchronous one, I can use the keyword await in here. Within an asynchronous function, the term await says, hey, wait for this information to resolve. Wait till I have it before moving on to the next line of programming. And that's exactly what we want, because we don't want our program to go to the next bit until we have this information, because we likely want to use it. So let's create a constant called GitHub response. And in here, before doing that fetch, I'm going to use the keyword await, because I want my program to wait for that fetch to complete before moving on. So await, fetch, and I'll pop that URL in there. And if I try to console that out, GitHub response, you can see, before that, maybe I should actually call our function. That would be helpful. There we go. So you can see that it's actually returning that response result that we wanted. But this still isn't exactly what we're looking for. We want that JSON object that we saw in the browser. So when I'm looking at this response, I can see that there's a body. Whenever you want to access the information of the body of a response object, you'll use the JSON function on that response. It's one of the enabled provided functions that you can use on a response or request object. So I'm going to create a new constant now, or a new variable, whatever you want to store it in, and I'm going to use that JSON function. But that JSON function also returns a promise. So take a look at what happens. Let's call it user data, and we'll just go GitHub response.json, like so. And if I console log that out, you can see that this is also a promise. So again, what do we want to do with the promise? We want to wait for it to fulfill. So I'm just going to add that await in front of it like that. And now user data, in fact, has a JavaScript object from that JSON that it returned from the body. And it gives us all the information in a way that we want to be able to use. So that's essentially how you use async and await to grab information from a remote source.